Hello guys and welcome again to my channel. So our lesson for today is all about process costing. So if ever, I would like to congratulate everyone who started watching this series. The target of this series is to go through all of the bookkeeping or accounting, accounting for service entities, accounting for merchandise entities, accounting for manufacturing, which we are already starting. Not starting, we're already in the middle, and then accounting for not-for-profit organizations, accounting for corporations, accounting for partnerships. That's the way to go, and we're going to have the management accounting afterwards. So that's the direction of the series. Now, I would like to congratulate everyone because if you are already here, then that means you are already finished also in the job order costing. And we are now on the opposite. Not the opposite. Yeah, let's call it opposite of job order costing, which is process costing. And you have already known that on the job order costing, if ever, there are primary costs. There are product costs. Product costs which are raw materials, direct labor, direct materials by the way, and factory overhead, as well as if ever, there are unfinished goods, which has also direct material cost, direct labor, and factory overhead. There are already these costs in this work in process beginning. It is because it's already partially completed. So meaning, some direct materials has already been applied to those units, direct labor and factory overhead. So these are the costs. And if ever there are finished goods has a cost also, which is also composed of direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Because this will not be finished if ever you're not going to infuse materials, labor, and efforts and other things like factory overhead. Okay? So, in the job order costing, these costs are that to be accounted, meaning you have to find where did they go to be accounted. Okay? Where did they go? I told you they went to the jobs. They are being allocated to jobs. Like for example, the direct materials current. Actually, these costs here are current costs, which signifies your efforts in order to finish the work in process beginning and in order to start also other inventories and finish them if ever. Okay? Now, where did they go? They go to the jobs. Let's compare it to the process costing. The same question. If we're talking about process costing, let's erase this. The same question. If we have these primary costs or what do you call this main costs, that is still to be accounted. The current cost, direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead, and the cost of work in process inventory beginning. We do not include this in the process costing already. You'll understand why. Actually, there will be no finished goods beginning in a certain department if that is a department. Oh no, I have already said department. That should be later on. Okay, again. In the process costing, this is still to be accounted for. The current costs that the company has incurred, the manufacturing company has incurred, including direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. And the costs that were assigned to the work in process beginning, because again, it is partially completed already in the past period or in the previous period. So that means direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead has already been infused to them, although it's not yet completed. Okay? So those are the to be accounted for in the process costing. Later, you will learn why the finished goods is not part or finished goods beginning is not part of the to be accounted in the process costing. So the same question, Where did those costs go? Those costs go to the different departments. Like for example, Department 1 and Department 2. It's not accumulated in the jobs or allocated in the jobs. So why is it? Here in the process costing, I told you that this is the opposite of job order costing because the customers in the job order costing, we are satisfying their unique specifications. And if you remembered, we're talking about wedding gowns that of course client number one has a different specification for her wedding gown versus the client number two. Okay? So meaning, maybe client one is luxurious, so that means she wanted to have a very nice, very expensive, very elegant wedding gown. So meaning, you have to trace the cost of that job versus job 2 because it would be unfair if the costs are to be mixed with client number 2, for example, who wanted a simple wedding gown. Okay? Now in here, in the process costing, we are not processing some unique specifications of the client. We are just producing one product. Actually, mass producing one product only. For example, our business is manufacturing canned tunas. So those canned tunas, fish tuna, those canned tunas, of course, they are the same. They should be the same. They are homogeneous products. Okay? So, in short, companies or manufacturing companies who are producing or mass producing only a single product with the same design, with the same material, with the same weight, you have to use process costing. Okay? And if ever we're talking about mass producing a single or uniform product, sometimes they are already using uh, machineries to standardize the process. Okay? So, actually, if you are going to imagine the production of that homogeneous products, it will go to different departments until it is finished. Okay? Which is why, if you're going to be asked in the process costing, where did the current costs plus the work in process cost go? The answer is it has been allocated to the departments. Okay? Because Department 1 will incur his own direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. And Department 2 will also incur its own direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Okay? So it's allocated between departments. If we're talking about this, okay? Sir, you said there is no finished goods beginning that will be uh, put in the to be accounted for process costing. Why is it? It is because Department 1 and Department 2, for example, we are in Department 1. So, the Department 1 will incur direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Okay? Now, if Department 1 is using their own or consuming their own direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead, and then there will be some goods that will be finished. Of course, there will be some goods that will be considered as work in process end because they are only partially completed. As soon as Department 1 finish the goods, those will be transferred immediately to Department 2. So it's very impossible that Department 1 will have a finished goods beginning because as soon as it is completed, it will be transferred out to Department 2. Which is why we are not going to ask where did the finished goods beginning cost go. Okay? We just ask this. Okay? So it is allocated per department. And um, another way of thinking about this, in a certain department, for example, Department 1 has direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. Let's try within the department, exclusively for a certain department. And there are amounts here. And also, work in process beginning is present. We have direct materials. We have direct labor. We have factory overhead. If you're going to be asked, of these costs, this is to be accounted for within Department 1, where did it go? Of course, you cannot say that it went to Department 2. You focus only on Department 1. Of course, you cannot already answer that it has been allocated to different departments because again, this is exclusively for Department 1. So where did they go? They went with the completed and transferred and work in process end. So in the next episodes also, you will realize that there could be some allocation to losses. Okay? Whether normal or abnormal. Actually, the process costing is just centered in this, the to be accounted for and as accounted for. That is just the main question. So you already know that this is the first part is that process costing is appropriate for manufacturing entities producing homogeneous goods. Okay? And that those homogeneous goods are processed department by department. Okay? Like for example, uh, department 1 is cutting and cleaning. Something like that. I'm still thinking of the tuna canned goods. And then this is packaging. Something like that. It's a process. Okay? So that's number two. You already know that those goods will go from Department 1 to Department 2. So their costs are also coming from Department 1 and Department 2. Okay? The third, which is the most important question, the main question of process costing is that if a certain department is incurring current costs, direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead in the current period, plus, if ever, there are work in process beginning, which has already direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead also, you total these costs, you have to find them. That is to be accounted for. So where did it go? That's the main question here. And of course, the answer would be, it could be in the work in process end because the goods, even if you have these efforts, these are your current efforts, the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Those are your efforts. In order to finish this, and in order to start units, and try to finish them. Okay? Of course, there will be those that will not be finished. So work in process end. Some will go to the work in process end. Some will go to the completed and transferred. That means it will go to Department 2 already because it's completed by Department 1 and it should be transferred already. Okay? Especially if we're talking about this example, you have finished cutting and cleaning. Of course, it goes to packaging. Okay? And of course, there are some times that these costs that we're talking about here that to be accounted for will not be accounted for already at the end sa as accounted for. It's because it has been lost. Normally, meaning expected losses. Abnormally, that means unexpected. Okay? So that's the main question here. And everything that we're gonna do is just the process of allocating this to these. How do we allocate these to these? Completed and transferred, work in process end, and losses if ever. Okay? So that's process costing basically. Now, let's have an illustrative example. I guess it would be nice if the illustrative example is here. Let's try. Because usually the illustrative example is here. But I don't want to erase this so that you will see this. Okay? Now, for example, we have BBG, Tuna Company, has the following information. For um, period 20x2. So, current costs incurred. You have direct materials, department 1. Okay, so I'm going to extend this to department 2 also. Not yet. Okay, so not yet. Let's talk about department 1 first. We have direct materials of 400,000. You have direct labor of 750. You have a factory overhead of, for example, 1 million. Or, ano, let's not do that. Because factory overhead is usually applied based on the direct labor. 750,000 times 60%. 450,000. Those are your efforts. Again, these current costs are actually your efforts converted into peso amounts. So you wanted to finish the goods, so you have to put direct materials. And you wanted to finish the goods, of course, you have to put efforts in converting them. Okay? So 750, 450, this is 60% of the direct labor, something like that. Next is, we have the work in process beginning. So the work in process beginning is, I guess, 3,000 units. 3,000 units. And then the direct materials, let's put also the percentage of completion because that is very important in allocating. Okay? So, for example, this is already 40% complete. I know. We should not put that here. Direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. So, we have 22,500. Wait. Yeah, 22,500. Okay. And then, we have 47,000 on the direct labor. And also, on 47,000, since the factory overhead is 0.60, so this is 28,200, which is still 60% of direct labor. So that's the first one. Okay? So, what I meant on the percentage of completion of the work in process, it's because it's partially completed. That means work was done for it. Okay? So, let's say for example, on the direct materials, this is already um, 30% complete. And in the direct labor, it's about 35% complete. Okay? Actually, on both of these two, 35% complete. Factory overhead, it could be 35% complete also. Okay? So, sir, why is it that the percentage of completion of the work in process differs on the direct materials and direct labor and factory overhead. It's because, guys, let's face it, realistically, sometimes there are some products that the direct materials are put first before converting it. Sometimes, in the problems, you will notice that the materials are introduced at the very beginning of the process. So then that means materials are immediately 100% complete. And of course, the conversion costs, which are direct labor and factory overhead, is applied evenly throughout the process. So you can always see that the materials could be 100% and the conversion cost uh, is about only 30% or 40% because of those things realistically. Okay? And sometimes there are some problems that you will see that the materials are introduced at the end of the process. I could not find logic in that because I couldn't find examples, but there is. So that means at the very beginning until the the processing itself, the materials is 0%, while the conversion cost is, what do you call this? The conversion cost is going. So materials is 0%, conversion cost is about 40% for example. Because the materials are only introduced at the end. It doesn't make sense if ever we're talking about Department 1 because how will you convert if ever there is no materials, right? However, if you are already in Department 2, by the way, I have thought about that now. So if you are in Department 2, that means there are partially completed goods from Department 1. Of course, in the point of view of Department 1, it's 100% complete already. So it will be transferred to you. So if you're in Department 2, you have actually an option based on the design of the product to introduce materials in the end. It's possible. Okay. So, did you understand this? Of course, again, the completion of the units here in the process costing as well as in real life, they are not usually 30% direct materials and 30% also in the direct labor and factory overhead because the materials could be introduced later or former, later or at the beginning of the process. And the conversion could be evenly. Okay? So, that's it. Now, what happened? This is what happened as accounted. For example, aside from these, you have an information that the company started during the year or during the current year. If this is 3,000, for example, you started 20,000 units. That's another information. And in the ending, on the as accounted, you finished 7, no, no, no. Yeah, 19,000. You finished 19,000. Okay? And then, but the other term for this one is completed and transferred. And then, we have work in process ending. The work in process ending is, of course, blank, for example. And then there is no loss that were mentioned, for example. And then the work in process end, you already know, it's given here that that is 50% complete and the direct labor is and factory overhead is both 40% complete. The question is, what is the cost of completed and transferred for Department 1? And what is the work in process ending? for department 1. That is as simple as that. Okay? So, so it's still recording. So how do we do this? Particular example. Question. Why is the completed and transferred cost very important? It is very important because, again, the completed and transferred units, um, the completed and transferred units will be transferred to the subsequent department. Like if we are in department 1, which we are in this example, you have to transfer the units to department 2. Okay? And then in the department 2, aside from transferring the physical units, you have to transfer also the cost, okay, to them. Because if we're talking about completed and transferred here, this is actually transferred out costs also in some other books. That is the transferred in cost in the point of view of Department 2. So which is why this is very much needed. Because the costs here in the process costing is accumulating per department. Okay? So the costs in Department 1, if the goods are finished, will be transferred to Department 2. So on the Department 2, it is to account the cost from Department 1 plus its current costs, its own costs. And if there is still a Department 3, and the Department 3 will analyze the transferred in cost from Department 2, which is also composed already of transferred in cost from Department 1. So it's accumulating. They are not processing only their costs, their own costs. Okay? They are actually transferring it from them to other departments. Okay? So, which is why this is important. And of course, the work in process end is important because this will become the work in process beginning of the department in the subsequent period. So, this is needed to pass this to subsequent departments. This is needed because it's needed by the department itself in the subsequent period. Okay? So, I guess I'll just cut this video short for now because my focus is just to let you know the concept of process costing as opposed to job order costing. Okay? So that's the concept of process costing, and I have already introduced our first illustrative problem, and we will solve it in the next episode. And remember, number 1, process costing is for manufacturing entities producing homogeneous products. Second, the costs here are accumulated per department. Per department, it's because homogeneous products are usually processed in different departments, like the tuna example that we have. We have here the cutting and cleaning for the department 1, and then after cutting and cleaning, it will go to packaging. So that's number 2. It's accumulated per department instead of per job. Okay? The third one is that it's the most important thing. If there are product costs, direct material, direct labor, and factory overhead currently, plus the cost of the work in process beginning of a certain department, direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead applied to the work in process beginning, those costs, where did they go? This is the heart of process costing. Of course, the answer is this cost is distributed to completed and transferred for the finished goods of the department. And then there are some that are unfinished, but they are partially completed already. So there will be costs that will be assigned to there. And if ever there are losses, sometimes there are costs that will be allocated to it. Okay? So that is the main goal for process costing. And again, if you have already knowledge on process costing, you can solve this. And let's confirm if ever we have the same answer on the next episode. So again, congratulations for finishing service entities, merchandising entities, and step 1 to 10 of the manufacturing cycle and the job order costing system. Let's go higher accounting. Okay? So thank you for watching and see you on the next one. Bye-bye.